Yes. Wonderful. Okay, so welcome everybody. I would like to say a few words at the beginning before we start. First of all, I would like to say that this is the fourth lecture that is going to be delivered within the project Analytic Philosophy in Visegrad countries. So this is the project that comprises 3 workshops, lectures, and this is one of the lectures, as well as we plan to record some podcasts this academic year. So the general idea behind the project is to popularize and share knowledge on work that has been done and is done nowadays in Czech Republic, Hungary, Slovakia, and Poland. We plan much more lectures, and Susanna probably will tell something more about that. And this month we'll be having the second workshop devoted to various aspects of philosophy of science in Visegrad countries. So this is a general description of the project, but I would like to perhaps also inform everybody that we just started a YouTube channel for our project, and here I'm copy-pasting the link in the chat box. And already we have the 3 lectures that have been delivered till now. So the lecture by Professors Zoltan Szabo, Jaroslav Peregrin, and Björn Jespersen are already there. So anyone who is interested might listen to the lectures and the discussion on our YouTube channel. So this is a general information about the project and the things we are doing. And the lecture we are having today will also be on the YouTube channel, hopefully soon. So that's a general introduction, but let me move to the proper part of our meeting today. It's my great pleasure today to welcome our speaker. That is Professor Paweł Grabarczyk from IT University of Copenhagen and University of Łódź. So let me say just a few words about our speaker. So Paweł Grabarczyk is a philosopher who works jointly, I would say, in the area of philosophy of language and perhaps philosophy of mind, analytic philosophy in general, as well in the area of game studies. And so he combines the 2 areas. And he's an expert in many themes and topics, but among them, one of them, which will be the central for our, which will be at the center of our today's meeting, is theory of meaning or theories of meaning, and especially a theory of meaning called Directival Theory of Meaning that has been developed originally in the 30s by Kazimierz Ajdukiewicz and is historically probably the first version of inferentialism that has been ever proposed. But in addition to that, Paweł also writes book on history of computers, for instance, and I know that Paweł not yet published, but is just about to publish, right? A book on Atari computer. So the history of Atari computer. So that's another area of Paweł's interests. So let me just say that Paweł is the author of an excellent study of the Directival Theory of Meaning, published in the Synthesis Library. And I'll also share you a link from the editor website. So this is Paweł's book on Directival Theory of Meaning, published in 2019. So the title is Directival Theory of Meaning from Syntax and Pragmatics to Narrow Linguistic Content. And I assume that some things that we shall listen about today are going to be related to the book in question. So it's a great pleasure to host you here, Paweł, and without further introduction, I may only say, please, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this kind introduction. I will for sure be relating to the book and some other things that you mentioned. So let's start. And thank you for the invitation for this for this wonderful project. I'm really looking forward to new developments. It's a very cool idea. So let me start by uh, shortly introducing you to, let me just move this maybe, because yeah. So the theory I present is based on directival theory of meaning, as Tadeusz said. Uh, and this meaning, this theory of meaning, was originally developed by a Polish philosopher and linguist, Kazimierz Ajdukiewicz, in the 1930s, so quite a long time ago, soon to be 100 years ago. And it was interestingly abandoned shortly after its publication, and it was never fully developed. So one of the reasons I developed this further because is that once I read this theory, I thought this such a brilliant idea, and I was really sad that it was never actually properly developed either by its creator or by other people. So the theory was abandoned. Of course, when I say it was abandoned, the elephant in the room is that why. So it was abandoned because Ajdukiewicz realized that it allows that it has a strange quirk. This theory has a strange quirk in that it allows two synonymous terms to have different references. So it is like in Ajdukiewicz's mind at the time, it was a death blow. Like if a theory gives you this kind of result, something's wrong. Something's clearly wrong. But many ideas from this theory, even though, as I said, it was never properly developed, but many similar ideas appeared later in works of people such as Sellars, Quine, or Davidson. And even later, you can make a link to work of philosophers such as Robert Brandom or Jaroslav Peregrin. So it's not like so this theory was not developed, but it doesn't mean that similar ideas have not been investigated by philosophers later. And also, what is quite important, the fact that the theory allows two synonymous expressions to have different references is, I would say, no longer considered absurd. I mean, this is one of the things that Davidson points out in his seminal paper on the meaning of meaning, where he says, oh, well, in some cases we can have this narrow meaning in the head, which stays the same, but in reality, the reference is to two different substances, for example, in his famous thought experiment. So the idea that this can happen, that you can have this very, well, admittedly strange consequence, is no more considered to be a death blow to a theory. It's maybe just a feature of language. So today, I would say it's one of the things that I point out in the revised version of the theory is that today the directival theory of meaning can be best seen as a theory of narrow meaning. Narrow meaning in a sense of Davidson, for example. Once again, the meaning people have in their heads or the meaning people have in the community, but not necessarily the meaning that gives you a clear route to the reference of objects. Now, so there are certain historical reasons why this theory is interesting that are worth mentioning. One thing that I should mention maybe before I go into these historical reasons is that the main topic of my presentation today, the main reason I wanted to talk about this, are some new applications of the possible new applications of the DTM, of the directival theory of meaning. But in order for you to appreciate the idea of these new applications, you have to understand what the theory is. And I can't assume that everybody knows the theory well. So that's why a significant chunk of my lecture will be devoted to explaining to you how the theory works, So then you can understand in its original and developed version, and the newer version developed by me, so you can then later understand of why do I think there are new ways of applying this theory that might be attractive to people, right? So that's why I'm going through this part of the lecture where I explain what the directional theory of meaning is. So there are some historical reasons that this theory that makes this theory intriguing or interesting to people, and Tadeusz already mentioned some of them. So, first of all, it was the first attempt at the formal definition of meaning, because it's like not just a paper, it's an attempt to create a formal representation of what meaning in language is. Admittedly, it was done on a toy, simple example, but it still was a formal representation of meaning. And it also was the first theory that we know of that connects the meaning of expressions with their use. A lot of people think and attribute this pioneering effort to Wittgenstein, but in reality, Ajdukiewicz did it earlier. This is the first theory where it clearly connects meaning to usage, as you're going to see. And it was the first instance of functional role semantics or inferential semantics, as it defined the meaning of expressions by the role they play in the rules of a language. Again, very similarly to what Sellars did later. So if you are aware of Sellars' theory of meaning, his functional role semantics, you will be very quickly at home with this theory. And it was also the first non-referential theory of meaning, because not only, so one important thing is that when I said that it has this surprising conclusion that two synonymous expressions can have different references, it is surprising, of course. It was surprising to Ajdukiewicz, but it shouldn't be that surprising because the theory itself is non-referential. It doesn't use reference. What I mean by that is that it doesn't use the notion of reference in its definitions, and it does not use the notion of truth in its definitions. It doesn't mean that it is anti-referential. So it's, just to be clear, this theory is neutral in this respect. It doesn't try to tell you that, I don't know, reference doesn't exist or the truth doesn't exist. Nothing of the sort. It just does not use these concepts when it defines meaning, so it can be completely neutral when it comes to your opinions on the matter of reference and truth. And it also contains an early approximation of the notion of a conceptual scheme, which was especially important for Ajdukiewicz. It wasn't as important to me when I was developing the theory. So very quickly, when Ajdukiewicz created this theory, even though it was a theory of meaning, even though it was the theory of language, his main goal was to create a theory a theory that can be used to explain how different scientific theories work. So he was basically interested in something we would today call, a conceptual scheme, or even maybe a paradigm, if you want to go a little bit towards Kuhn. So this was his plan. But then he created a theory that was more general than that, and it can be developed as a full-fledged theory of natural language, what was my aim. But then again, but it is still important if you're interested in the notion of conceptual scheme. This theory is designed for that. And my approach is not historical. I wanted to create a developed, useful theory of natural language. And for this reason, I use another moniker for this. I'm just talking about new directival theory of meaning, or NDTM instead of just directival theory of meaning, just so there's no confusion, because I don't want to go into these debates over as to whether my interpretation is the correct one when it comes to Ajdukiewicz's original ideas. My point was, this is a great idea, let's develop it. That's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to reconstruct original Ajdukiewicz's idea, although I believe that I kept its spirit, but it's another story. And as Tadeusz mentioned, and even provided the link on a chat, if you're interested in this theory in the new version, this is the book where I go through all the details. Today, I will be just trying to give you like a very short a crash course on how this theory works, so we can later focus on some possible new applications that might be attractive. But all the details you can find in the book. So let me now just give you the outline of new directival theory of meaning. So the best way to understand how this theory works and how this theory tries to uncover the notion of meaning is to focus on the beginning stage. Focus on the fact that this theory begins by examining how people resolve disputes. Whenever people, argue and cannot really come to terms on, which is a funny expression, by the way, come to terms, it's a very DTM expression. They try to find common language, try to understand each other, and they try to resolve a certain dispute. Now, what happens is that when communication fails, when people cannot get to any resolution, people may start to begin that maybe they are just talking past each other. That maybe they are not actually have different opinions on a matter, but they are actually using language differently. So maybe their dispute is purely linguistic or purely semantic. Sometimes it happens, it doesn't have to, but you at least may have this thought at the back of your head when you're like, maybe these people just understand terms differently. How can they be so fundamentally different in opinions than me? And one interesting aspect of this moment, when you realize that sometimes, in some cases, this discussion actually is purely semantic, that it is about understanding concepts, or understanding notions differently, the meanings of words differently, is that people don't really argue over semantics. So the moment when people realize that the difference was verbal, the heated dispute just vanishes. And what you have is like all of a sudden all the emotions cool down and people are like, oh, okay, I get it. This is just a difference in meaning. So people are not that, that strong-minded about the meaning of words, because they feel that, well, if this is just the meaning of words, that we can easily agree on new definitions, or just or agree on one of them, and then we will understand each other. So what happens when we start to suspect that this is just a verbal dispute is that we may start some kind of a procedure that I in the book called semantic trials. What I mean by that is that, well, the moment we start to suspect again that the people we are discussing something with, they understand a given term differently than us, we may just simply try to ask a silly question that we believe this person has to answer in a certain way. Otherwise, this will signify that this person doesn't talk about the same thing we talk about. Imagine, let's use an example. It's always easiest to understand things on an example. Let's say that we discuss something and then use the word table. But we are not sure if we talk about the table that you draw on on a paper and put some things in it, or a table as in a piece of a furniture, then I might ask this silly question by saying, but a table is a furniture, right? A piece of furniture, right? And this is the kind of a silly question that is silly in a sense that I expect that either this person says yes, and then we are on the same page and our dispute was not verbal, or this person says, no, no, I'm not talking about furniture. What I like, no. And then this person just talks, we were just talking past each other. So these semantic trials are this, I would say, silly, obvious questions that we believe we know what the answer is to. And we ask them just to synchronize our discourses, to understand if we are on the same page or not. So this theory generalizes this observation and assumes that for each vocabulary item, for each word in language, this language contains a set of sentences that the users are required to accept in certain circumstances. In other words, to simplify things just so we understand each other better now, for each word in a vocabulary, there are certain silly questions that you can ask. And you know that people have to answer them in a certain way. Otherwise, you just realize that they are using different language than you. And directives are the rules that instruct users to accept a given sentence in given circumstances. So that these meaning directives are simply these sentences that are tied to every word, which kind of fixes the circumstances that, well, whatever you think about tables, you have to say that they are a piece of furniture if you talk about the tables in this particular sense. Whatever you think about triangles, you may have very strange opinions about triangles, but you have to at least accept the sentence that they are geometric figures and stuff like that. So that for everything, there are these sentences that are non-negotiable. Like you can't really refuse them. So depending on the type of circumstances under which these sentences must be accepted, there may be different circumstances. We can distinguish 4 types of directives. So this is the table, this time not the furniture, but a proper table on a slide that shows the types of directives that we have. So if a given sentence is to be accepted in any circumstances, basically, even if you are woken up in the middle of the night, you are supposed to accept a given sentence. This is what we called axiomatic directives. These are sentences that are simply supposed to be accepted no matter what happens or no matter what has been said before this sentence were uttered. So a classic example of this sentence will be just identity. A is identical to A. If you just ask someone if they accept it, they have to accept it, because otherwise it means that they understand the identity relation differently than you. Then there are situations where you are required or expected to accept a certain sentence only if you accepted a certain sentence earlier. So the circumstances in these cases are something that you already accepted. Then once you accepted this, you are required or expected to accept something else. And these are called inferential directives. Modus ponens is a great example of that. You accepted a certain set of sentences, and then you have to accept the conclusion. And then the third type is very interesting and important and required, because this is the type that moves past simply language, that moves to non-linguistic aspects of our communication. And in this case, what it means that if you are in a certain internal state, then you are required to accept a certain sentence. Ajdukewicz's example is that if you're in pain, if someone touches your nerve, you are supposed to accept the sentence, "it pains." But you can imagine many other examples like that. If you just look at, an overwhelmingly big patch of red color, you should accept the sentence, "it is red," or something like that. So there are certain situations where you are in a physical state, perceptual state, in fact, in which if we know that you are in this perceptual state, you have to accept a given sentence. Otherwise, if you don't accept it, we will be like, "I don't think this person talks the same language as we do." So that's the important thing. This is the price we pay for not accepting these sentences, is that we are basically denied the role of a competent user of language. Will be delegated to the role of the usage of some other language, or maybe, I don't know, a small kid who doesn't understand words yet. So this is the third type of directives, called empirical directives. Again, in a certain state, perceptual state, you have to accept a certain sentence. And the last one, which was not originally present in Ajdukewicz's theory, is kind of like a reverse of these empirical directives. It means that if there are some specific motor action, then if there is a specific sentence uttered, then you are required to do something. So my example is that if someone says stop, and you don't really stop, it just means that you either did not, but then you accept, yeah, I understand what you said. Yeah, I get it. So you accept the sentence stop. Yes, you agree to it, but you don't stop. You might be again accused of not being a competent user of the language. So the important thing is that not only, I'm not saying that you have to do anything that people shout at you, but if someone says something to you and you accept it, but then your motor action is kind of contradicting what you just accepted, you might be or will be accused of not being a proper language user. So these were the types of directives that are in language. And now, how do you move from that? How do you move from just distinguishing between these types? So now suppose we collect all the directives used by a given community and consider their totality, their set. Let's call this set D, as in directives. So two expressions, A and B, are said, according to this theory, two expressions A and B are synonymous if they can be mutually substituted within this set. What it means, again, it means that if you have two expressions that play exactly the same role in the set of the directives of language, then they are the same expression, really. They have the same meaning. They have, we use different letters as their etiquettes, but they have the same meaning. So meaning is the position that a given expression has in the set of the directives. So in other words, it's a distribution pattern in D. We will see an example, more of a graphical example in a moment, so we can understand it better. And maybe before I move, once again, this is the key idea of how you can define synonymity. Synonymity of expressions does not mean that this is the point where this theory differs from some other later theories. synonymity of expression does not mean that they are exactly the same in any usage. No, it means that they are the same in this special set of sentences that we call directives, which, as I said, were these almost like silly sentences that we have to accept that seem obvious to us and typically not useful unless we have a dispute. So this is how synonymity is defined, but we can also define the notion of translation. We can say that an expression A is a translation of an expression B if their distribution patterns in their respective languages is identical. So the idea here would be is that if you have two languages and if you create a nice set of directives in one of them and then create a set in the other of them, the second one, and then compare them, then you might realize that certain expressions have exactly the same distribution in these sets. And again, as you are going to see in a moment, this can even be represented graphically. So the moment you realize, oh, this expression plays exactly the same role in these two languages, it just means this is a translation of this. And I think that it is a very, at least to me, it is very intuitive notion of translation. Because if you think of translations, whenever you say that something is not a perfect translation from another language, it typically means that it works in many contexts, but there is something, that there's some fundamental context that this doesn't really fit. That, for example, in this language, you can use it here, but in this other language, it would be completely unacceptable. This is when we say this is a partial translation. So I think this, as a notion of a translation, it is fairly intuitive. And then languages that share the same distribution patterns of linguistic and non-linguistic items share the same conceptual scheme. I put this sentence here, I put this conclusion of the Directival Theory of Meaning, but we won't be really exploring this today. This one was important for Ajdukiewicz and is much more important if you want to talk about, if you want to use this theory as an explanation in philosophy of science, maybe less so in philosophy of language, but I mean, to some extent as well. Now, let me just go through these characteristics of this new directival theory of meaning so we understand like what kind of theory it is, like what kind of features it has, because we will use it later in this idea of application of theories, possible application of the theory. So first of all, what follows from this theory is that language users conform to the directives, but they need not be explicitly aware of them. So it is, in a way, the semantic rules, the directives, are similar to the syntactic rules of language. What it means is that you follow them, you don't violate them. Moreover, whenever someone violates them, you are like, what? You feel like very shocked. Just like with the similarity with syntax is very useful here. Whenever someone uses an expression that violates syntax of your language, you will be completely confused. I mean, poetry does it sometimes on purpose, so you know the feeling probably. And you see this and you're like, what? Like, what does it mean? That makes no sense. But then if someone asked you, what is exactly the rule that was violated here? Then unless you really remember the lessons from your elementary school or high school, or unless you happen to be a given language scholar or a linguist, you might not be able to give this rule. You just feel that it is not right. And in this same sense, the semantic rules, the directives, they are supposed to work exactly the same way. So you're like, you can't say that. You feel that you can't say something, but it don't really, you are not really able to elaborate on like what exactly was the directive that was supposed to be uh, uh, used here and was actually violated. Another feature of this theory is, as I said at the beginning, but now we can see why, is that this theory is non-referential. Well, it is non-referential because simply, as you saw, when we defined the notion of synonymy and when we defined the notion of translation, we never said anything about reference. We never said, for example, that a translation from a given language has to preserve reference, or that two synonymous expressions have to have I mean, we didn't also say that it doesn't. It's just, my point is that it doesn't use this notion. That's why it's a non-referential theory. And it is also, again, to locate it within other theories that you may know, that you may understand better because they are much better known. It is a weakly holistic theory. The expression or the term that is used to describe this kind of theories is it is a molecularist theory. What it means is that it is similar to holistic theories in that it talks about the role expressions play in some corpus of text. But instead of saying it is the role the expression plays in the whole language or in the totality of utterances of people, it says it is the role the expression plays in this specific, very, very special set of sentences. And that's why it is a weakly holistic theory. It is important. I don't have the time for this today. It is important because this weakened nature of holism in the DTM or NDTM is one reason why it does not fall, it doesn't not suffer from the same consequences. It doesn't, some of the challenges known for holistic theories do not apply to the NDTM because it's of this weakened nature of the set it uses as the basis. And also one very important thing that I will get back to later, it is that it is a prohibitory semantics. It doesn't really say what you have to say. It doesn't really say what you have to, I don't know, utter. It only says that in cases where someone challenges you and asks something, you cannot violate a certain rule. You cannot, you have to accept certain sentences. So in this very, very specific cases, it doesn't really predict what will you say. I will get back to it in a moment because it will be actually needed for one of the extensions that I want to suggest at the end. And another last aspect of the NDTM that is interesting is that within this theory, language is inherently public. What it means is that the meaning is based on the distribution patterns of the directives that are used within community, not within a single person. So the consequence of this is that if you are a very non-standard user of the language, you will kind of lose this game. Because what is important is that these directives have to be shared by the community. They have to be jointly accepted as things that you have to accept, and not just your own opinions of what a given word means. So there are two burning questions, if you have this kind of theory, that need to be answered for this theory to work nicely. The first one is that, well, what is so special about meaning directives? Like, how do we choose them? How do we get to this set of meaning directives? They are a key aspect of this theory. And the other is how this basic meaning defined only on a set of a very special sentences, how is it to be extrapolated? Like, how does it trickle down to all these usages that I normally have in language that are not based on, silly questions that I know that I have to, how do I have to react to them? So how the normal usage when directives are not in play, how does it refer to this special case of special set of sentences? So to show you how this might work, let me just now proceed to the application of the DTM, and I will start with the standard way you would go to apply this theory to natural language, and then proceed to this two new ideas that I have that I decided to talk about today. So what does it look in practice, the application of this theory? Well, if you wanted to create a theory for a natural language, for a given natural language, you have to begin by gathering the directives. This is something that we call the pragmatic phase. You observe the community, you see and you try, you probe the community, you try to find, can be your own community, and you try to find out what are these almost like axioms or dogmas of the language. What are the directives of this language? So what you look for especially are cases in which a speaker's reaction is treated as unacceptable by the community. So the cases where the community says, you can't possibly think that. It makes no sense. Like the English expression, this makes no sense, is very nice here because it really shows that this semantic connection to our reaction. That in some cases we just literally say that it is semantically void, that there's something wrong with with meanings. So you look for these cases where people cannot accept a certain thing. So such cases become visible whenever a charitable interpretation is impossible. So in normal cases, people might, hear you, might hear what you have to say, and might just relegate you to a very strange thinker. I mean, it's not that surprising for philosophers. So people might think, oh, this is just a very eccentric point of view. But at some point, the charitable interpretation doesn't work anymore. And at some point, people are no longer keen on saying that someone is just eccentric or very, very wrong, or I don't know, stupid even. They will just say this person uses words differently. There's something like no one can say that, makes no sense. And this is what we look for. So a characteristic feature of semantic rules, interestingly, I think, is that in a sense, they cannot really be violated. That whenever you violate this rule, people will be like, okay, so you just don't know the rule. So you're not talking the same, like you are a foreigner or something. You maybe went through a very strange education, you don't know the rule. So they don't really think that you violated the rule, they actually think that you don't know it. So in a way, they can't be, they are like almost like they can't be violated. That's a very interesting aspect of that. And once we have gathered these directives, we must describe their structure. And this is the important part. This is where Ajdukiewicz was also pioneering because he did this kind of attempt of a formal description of the structure. Because you need a syntactic phase. So you capture the set of directives just by probing the community. And then once you have it, you try to make a description of it so you can create a nice table, basically, of all these directives and then look for patterns. Oh, this word appears in this distribution. Oh, this word appears in this distribution. That's the idea here. So let me show this on this example. Very simple one. even simpler than the one that Ajdukiewicz uses in his paper. So imagine that you only have like one inferential directive, which is basically modus ponens, which says that if P implies Q, and if you accept P, you should accept Q. Then you have two axiomatic directives. You say that basically they are just, again, just identity statements. P equals P and Q equals Q. And then you have an empirical directive, which says that in a certain physical state one, whatever it is, you should accept the sentence P. And then you have one promotive directive, meaning that if you accept the sentence Q, for example, our stop, you should initiate a certain motor state of your body. Like the most simple, it could be simpler if it had one identity statement, but it's like almost the simplest example you can imagine. So now the idea is that you try to distribute it in a table, and you can do it in many ways. That's the important thing. This part is just one of the ideas of how to represent this kind of directives, but they can be represented in multitude ways. One idea is to just separate the circumstances and the response in a table and creates something like what you see on the screen right now, and says that, oh, just going from the left and the top. In circumstances in which you accept that P implies Q and then accepted P, you are required, your response is that you are required to accept Q. Then in any circumstances, that's why circumstances are in the next rows are empty. In any circumstances, you are required to accept sentences of the form P is P and Q is Q. Then in the next row, the theory tells you that if you have this certain state, you have to accept P. And the last one, if the circumstances are that you accepted Q, you should get into a motor state. Very simple. And then the idea is that sometimes you can literally visually represent it. You might say, oh, P is something that appears in these specific places. And this specific placement, this distribution of the term in directives is almost like its signature. Every term has some distribution, some unique distribution, and if it doesn't, if it happens so the two terms have the same, then you just discovered a synonymous expression in your language. As I say in the book, this shows you that sometimes you might actually discover something is synonymous even though you didn't realize it. So the idea here is that the powerful idea is that you can actually really make almost like a visual representation of it. And then compare it to different languages and so on. So what are the aspects of this that are important to keep in mind? First of all, perceptual and motor state labels are not part of the language. That's the reason why they're on the sides of the table. We just say perceptual state, we just say motor state. We don't go into what it is. They do not have to be described in language. They're just like some kind of state. Whatever it is, we don't care. We just know that whenever people are in it, the community expects them to act in a certain way. And the only information we have about them, about these perceptual states and motor states, is the category they belong to and the fact that they are different from one another. So the only information this theory forces you to have is that there are perceptual states, there are motor states. Again, we don't go into details. This is where maybe cognitive science or theory of mind should help us. The reason why this theory does not want to go into this direction is because otherwise it would just be forced to be dragged into discussions that it doesn't need to be in. Discussions of what are perceptual states? Are they mental? Are they physical? Like, it doesn't matter here. Like, what matters is that there's some state, and the community recognizes that you are in the state and you should react in a given way. So specifically, nothing suggests that expressions in the linguistic part of the table refer to elements in the non-linguistic part. Note this. This is a very strong non-referential statement in this theory. Even though it uses the notion of a perceptual states, and it says that whenever you are in this perceptual state, you're supposed to, in this case, accept the sentence P, it doesn't say that P means that, I don't know, something is red. Or it doesn't say that P refers to our physical state. It doesn't use that. Because it doesn't have to. And nevertheless, even though they are disconnected from the rest of the language, these states, they contribute to the meaning in the same way as expressions. They simply occupy certain places in the table, which means they contribute to the structure. So it's a very structuralist approach, where we are only interested in this formal structure. We don't really care what exactly they are, as long as we just treat them as separate, unique some things. Now, I mentioned that I will get back to this notion of prohibitive semantics because it will be very much needed for for these extensions that I want to suggest in a moment. So let me go through this. To remind you, the idea here is that the directival theory of meaning doesn't really prescribe usage. It just tells you what to avoid. So traditional theories of meaning, I believe, were too demanding regarding the notion of meaning. They're almost maybe it's a bit of it is a bit too coarse-grained description, but the traditional theory of meaning almost acted as if the meaning of a word was supposed to give you a thorough manual of how to use the word in any circumstances. And I think that this is too demanding. Meaning does not determine usage according to NDTM. It only defines the boundaries of usage. So the usage is kind of free fall, but there are boundaries that you can't cross. As long as users remain within these semantic boundaries, they are free to say whatever they want. So to know the meaning of a word is not to know all its possible usages, but to know how to avoid misuse. To know how to use the word so you are never accused of not being the language user, your respectful language user. So to show this, I use this very crude picture, but this again will come helpful in a moment. The idea here is that imagine that you have vocabulary understood as a set of labels. Now, what is syntax is simply the set of rules that tell you how you can construct valid constructs out of this vocabulary. And you have this all possibility space of valid constructs. So the syntax is, again, I would say more about what is not allowed and what is allowed. And then semantics, this time provided by the DTM or the NDTM, New Directival Theory of Meaning, is very similar. It only tells you what are the boundaries, like what you have to do, what you have to accept. But the other things are like completely free fall. You can say whatever. You can have these very strange opinions. And then the gray rectangles are something I on the book call additional filters you can add to the language that may actually be similar to the DTM. So the DTM tells you you can say whatever you wish as long as you do not violate the semantic rules. But for example, a given community might also say, but you have to say things also that are true. So truth would be this additional filter provided by another theory that tells you you can't lie. You might also have another filter. In a given community, the community might say you cannot use certain words in certain situations, but not because they are semantically invalid, but they may be just, they will be treated as you being rude. So there are many, so the idea is that you have this production of language, starting with syntax, that is being constrained more and more by these sets of rules that I call filters. And this is what produces your actual utterances, the set of different filters that you add in your culture. But semantics is only a very early step here. It doesn't really do that much as much as people thought it will do. That's the idea behind the prohibitive aspect of the NDTM. So now that we have it, let's proceed to the new applications. I mentioned two of these applications in the book, and I want to now extrapolate on them, because I did not extrapolate on them in the book. I just mentioned that they are possible. So first of all, as we have seen, we talked about it many times, but this is an important point, so let me just repeat it. As we have seen, that DTM is non-referential and does not guarantee that directives are true. It does not guarantee it because it doesn't use the notion of truth. Again, just be careful the way on how as to how you think about it. It doesn't say anything about truth. It doesn't say they are false. It just, they most probably are true typically, but they don't have to be. And this is not a major issue, as it only means that if we want the DTM to serve as a theory of natural language, reference and truth must be added through a separate theory. This is what I suggested with these additional squares or rectangles. Then you need some additional filters of some additional rules of what it means that you have to say the truth, or what reference means in language. Not a shocking idea, not the first theory that says that the reference might be a different theory than the theory of meaning. So what I find particularly interesting is that the non-referential nature of the DTM can be an asset in certain special cases. And these two new applications that I will mention actually make use of this non-referentiality. So the first one is treating a new directival theory of meaning as a theory of fiction. So the challenge in fictional discourses, or rather discourses about fiction, that's the safe way to describe this, discourses about fiction. So the challenge in such discourses is finding a good balance of solving a certain problem that we have when we talk about fiction. Because we may be reluctant to claim that all sentences about fiction are entirely true or entirely false or entirely or they don't have any true value. Basically, we might be reluctant. Some people might be okay with saying that all of them are false or they don't have a true value, but some people might want to differentiate. Some people might want to still keep the differentiation between truth and falsity within the discourse about fiction. So, for example, we may want a theory of fiction that will be able to explain why the sentence Harry Potter was a wizard is preferable to the sentence Harry Potter was a lizard. Why we would say that, oh, the first one is correct, whatever correct means, if truth is not allowed here, and the other is not correct. And at the same time, we do not want to accept the ontological commitments implied by treating the first sentence as just simply true, because we don't want to say, oh, well, I accept that the first of these sentences is true, so there is a Harry Potter and he was a wizard. So obviously, this is a well-known problem, right? But what I'm getting to is that a theory such as NDTM has an elegant way of explaining, of providing what we want, providing this balance in a fairly easy way. So the DTM can help here because it explains why certain sentences are correct or valid or accepted without requiring them to be true. So this theory is arguably best suited for literary fiction, simply because we already have sentences there. And in this case, all sentences written by the author can be treated as axiomatic directives. It can be said as, these are the things that you have to accept, no matter what. And then people discussing fictional characters or fictional worlds must accept these facts, established facts in quote, established by the author. They must treat them as the DTM explains, their role is simply that of axiomatic directives. But at the same time, these people that engaged in discourses about fiction are completely free to make other claims. Some of these claims may be warranted if they logically follow from the established facts. So, for example, if fans of, again, Harry Potter books, they might be saying things such as, oh, but if Harry Potter was in this place at the time, this means he couldn't hear that. And they might have fan theories about the book based on some logical consequences of what is written in the book, which people totally do, but this theory explains of why this is possible. Because, well, yes, there are inferential rules, and you are allowed to make inferences from your axiomatic directives. And in general, speculation is allowed for these discourses about fiction, as long as it does not contradict the directives. For example, that is what is explicitly written in fiction. What it means is that you are just like the DTM told you that, oh, there's this certain set of sentences that you have to accept, otherwise you won't be the user of language. In this application, the DTM tells you there is this certain set of sentences, basically everything that was written in the book, that you have to accept, but you are absolutely allowed to make speculations. Like you can talk about anything you want, just like in the DTM, as long as you don't violate the directives, in this case, the text. So, and I would argue that this approach seems very consistent with what people actually really do when they engage in very long and sometimes convoluted discussions about fiction. So if you go to internet forums, you will see people discussing, sometimes very strange, crazy theories about their beloved fiction. And then the rules this community uses is that, well, you can't really contradict what was written. You are allowed to try to find places where you can speculate, as long as you don't contradict it. Which again, this theory fits this kind of practice, communal practice, like a glove. So that's the first application that I would suggest is interesting, using this theory as a theory of fiction. But then another one is something that I suggested in the book to an extent, is that it can be actually used as a theory for explainable AI. So what I hinted in the book is at the end is that the Directival Theory of Meaning can be useful for building or explaining how artificial intelligence works. So that was the idea back then. But since the book was written before, it was written in 2019, so it was written before the current wave of generative AI. I kind of updated this idea and now see the DTM as especially useful in the context of something that is called explainable AI. So a very specific idea within the discussions about generative AI. I will use uh, the acronym of XAI from now on, as it is typically used in the literature. So explainable AI addresses the black box problem in generative AI. Because in generative AI, we get results, but we often cannot know how they were produced. And even the AI agent itself may not know how this was produced. Like, why did you generate this answer and not some other one, right? And we like everybody who used the current Gen AI, be it Gemini or ChatGPT or whatever, they many times had this experience where they're like surprised by the answer. Then they point out to the machine that it was wrong, and the machine is like, "Oh, I'm very sorry," and then maybe even produces some explanation of what it was. But these explanations typically completely false. So the idea here is, just before I go to two approaches to this explainable AI, is that what we want to do, what the goal here is to create the future generative AI that will not only give us answer to our question, but it will also be nicely able to explain why did it choose this answer. And well, the idea is that then, first of all, it will be easier for us to use it, because it will be easier for us to prompt it in a way that is useful for us, because we will understand how it thinks, so to speak. And the other idea, more important one, is that will maybe more, not more important one, but more socially important, is that it will increase our trust in these technologies if they are no longer just black boxes. So there are two approaches to explainable AI in the current literature, two big strains of ideas of how to do it. So one is that we should equip the AI with mechanisms to reverse engineer its reasoning and uncover how it arrived at the answer. So the attempt to make a reverse engineer effort to actually really uncover what happened, like why did I think of that? But the other strain is quite interesting, is that according to this other idea, maybe we should just generate a post hoc explanation that clarify the answers without claiming to describe the exact process. So there's no actually this second approach does not really tell you this is what really happened. It just let's make a mechanism that is able to create the post hoc explanation that will be acceptable and understandable to people. As you probably expect, the second option seems much more viable and easier to do. But if you describe it like that, the second approach may seem almost like a hoax. Which is like, okay, so you're fabricating it after, right? But it can actually be developed in such a way that mirrors how humans create their explanations. And this is where the DTM can be helpful, I think. So this is the idea of how the DTM can be used to empower the second approach that, which, as I said, kind of feels like a hoax, but it doesn't have to. So what could happen is that, well, imagine that the AI generates an answer to your question, and then what it does is that it compares it to a set of directives it must comply with, to a set of sentences this answer has to be compatible with. Now, it also generates an inferential chain, again, within the DTM, this is a normal thing, we have inferential directives. We know how to show which inferential chains are valid. So the AI is supposed to also create this inferential chain that supports the answer, that ensures consistency with the directives. So first of all, it sees that it does not violate any directives, and also it is able to give us the inferential step-by-step explanation of how this answer can be obtained from what it had, information that was compliant with the directives. So, and then this is the trick. This is why it's not a hoax, because it happens at the time when the AI generates the answer to you. So it generates the answer. Internally, it checks this answer. It sees if it's compliant with the directives, if it is possible to create the inferential chain, and only if this answer satisfies these requirements, it can be passed to you. Otherwise, the AI must produce a new answer. So the reason I would say it may be actually similar to how actual humans do reasonings is that, well, imagine that you are asked to come up with an idea or a solution to a problem. And you sit there at the meeting and ideas come up to you and you pop up in your head. And you might be like, the first idea is very stupid. I'm not going to say this. The other might work, but I know that these people will never accept it, so I'm not going to say this. And then the third idea comes up and it's, oh, okay, this is good, this is good. And then you tell the third idea because you know that you are able to back it up in this community. And I would say that using DTM for explainable AI in this specific case is very similar. The AI tries to generate ideas, generate answers, and then knows that only one of them is acceptable, not only good for whatever reason it normally uses, statistical reasons probably, but it's also acceptable in this community. And this is why it can be given at the end. So in this model, explainable AI is not a hoax because the explanation actively constrains the effects and affects the result. So it is actually causally connected to the result. It's not just a nice story that we say at the end. And the AI operates on two levels. Answer generation is statistical, but the answer evaluation is inferential. So it generates these ideas, whatever it uses, typically statistical analysis, but the evaluation of this evaluation as to is it acceptable, can I pass it on, is used using very different rules. And these rules can be explained by the DTM. So needless to say, the set of directives has to be supplied by the operator or the creator of the AI agent. So it's not something that the AI comes up with it by itself. And that would be all. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the super interesting lecture and inspiring talk. So we are now entering the Q&A part of our meeting. So
one second, I will just switch my light on.
Okay, sure. So we are entering now the Q&A part of our meeting, and we might now start asking questions. So if there are any questions, feel free to use the raise your hand button, or you might also write me or I want to ask a question in the chat box, and we shall proceed with the discussion. Okay, so the discussion is now officially open. So please, are there any questions, comments, or remarks? I see that there is a first question from Susanna. Susanna, please.
Interesting talk. I would like to ask concerning the applications and the first one, the fictional discourse. Because recently I came up through a Damska paper. I'm not sure whether it's empty names or proper names, one of them, those. And she discussed the fictional characters in the end of the paper, and she also differentiated between completely fictional characters are also sometimes the case that in the fictions there are real characters, like Napoleon or stuff like that. And I was wondering during your talk how the director theory of meaning would deal with these kind of characters in the fiction. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very interesting. I didn't think of that, but the moment you asked this question, I realized the connection between this application of the DTM and something I was thinking about many times earlier when I was thinking about fictional discourses in general and how they work. So one thing that I believe is characteristic for fictional discourses is that there are some communal rules in which claims are we able to, where we are allowed to export from fiction to non-fiction. So imagine that you are reading a book, a fiction book, where there is a Napoleon, or there's like, I don't know, there doesn't have to be a Napoleon. A lot of books do not contain actual people, but they contain actual places. So there's, for example, the book happens in Paris or in, in Prague. And then you read that there are certain, let's say that you read that there is a certain shop at a certain street. If you just followed this, what you find in fiction, and assumed that whatever you read in the book is just like fits the topography of the city or fits the biography of the character, people will tell you that you don't understand how fiction works. Because obviously you're not supposed to take these things out of the fiction. You're not supposed to just take these claims and make them your beliefs. And I think that DTN can help here. It can show that there might be some inferential restrictions, some interesting inferential restrictions on fiction as to what can you take from fiction and put in this bigger set of your beliefs. That's my first thought about it that came up with me.
Thank you.
Okay, so Susanna, would you like to add something to that, or I assume no. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for the answer. So yeah, I would like to ask if there are any other questions or comments. So there is a question from Milos. Milos, please.
Thank you very much. Oops. I'm trying to turn on my camera, but okay, never mind. If I understood you correctly, we have expression, and the expression has meaning as long as it does not violate any directives, right?
I mean, you use the expression correctly as long as it does not violate the directives.
Oh, okay. So I have one stupid example. Let's say that I will utter a sentence, pigs can fly. And my question is very simple. Is it a meaningless expression or sentence, or is it just meaningful but false?
I would say that it's completely meaningful because I think that in this case, it's still, again, the test of charitable expression, interpretation. You might be like, that's very strange. But maybe this person has a very strange theory of biology, or maybe this person has some kind of an idea of pig's anatomy or maybe this person actually meant that they fly because they are transported in a plane. Like you might try to come up with some explanations of why would you hold this belief. Whereas the moment a real case of violating a directive is where people are like completely helpless. Like they have no idea what could you mean by that.
Mhm, mhm. So it's similar like if I say, let's say, I don't know, numbers can fly, it's still the
Yeah,
same.
numbers can fly will be a good example of like what.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, comments, remarks, stuff like that? There is a question from Natalia. Natalia, please.
I'm sorry, I was in the half of your talk, which is very interesting. I was in total blackout in Kiev. So so I tried to write down my questions during your talk, and all they you answered on all of them at the end of your talk. So the questions were why it is non-referential, why it is important to you, how it is possible to be non-referential for the linguistic expression, exclamatory ones, commands, and so on. Why it is so important to you? So mostly you've answered on these questions at the end, but I'm still feel a little pretty unsatisfied of how it is correlates with Meinong theory of this abstract object, how it correlates with abstract objects and fantastic objects or imaginative objects, how it could be useful for psychiatry, for instance, because it is very important because it is on the edge of reality and non-reality, of imaginative objects or feelings or some illusions and so on. And when you connected when you connected it with explainable AI, so and it is interesting point how it correlates with the simulation of object by AI or hallucination, so-called hallucinatory objects, which AI generates. So if it is sorry for such chaotic chaotic explanation or putting questions, but they are all moving around, circling around your approach. So what can you, if it is clear, how can you point it out?
Thank you. I mean, everything was clear. It's just that there were many questions, so I might forget about something. Sorry, I didn't make notes. From the top of my head, first, why is non-referentiality so important to me? It's just that I like when I don't have to make assumptions in a theory. I feel that it's a value. If a theory can be simpler, it's a value. So if a theory can be completely neutral here, I believe it's a good thing. But that's one thing. And the other thing is that there is this problematic aspect of the theory allowing two synonymous expressions to have different reference that made Ajdukiewicz just abandon the theory that I think can be saved. There are ways of saving this theory, but if the moment you embrace non-referentiality is not a problem at all. So it's so that's one of the two reasons. Now, as for the other questions, I can't really tell you much about the possible usages of this theory in psychiatry. I didn't think of that, honestly. Maybe there is some very interesting way of applying it. One stumbling block that I can see here is that this theory is always about a language that is very public, that it has to be a shared community, a community that shares an opinion of what is acceptable or not acceptable, what is the set of directives, basically. And when you try to approach a situation of a person that, let's say, has their own views that are understandable only to them, as in your example, that someone has a hallucination, that might be tough just because it's not a public thing. But I don't know. Maybe there's a great idea there of how to apply it. I did not think about it. I just see this one possible thing to solve. Now, when it comes to the last thing, how do you treat hallucinations of AI? Well, that's the beauty of it, is that you don't have to care about it that much, because within this theory, you don't, like, what is a hallucination? It's a very strange, like, we are stuck with this name, but this name is really misleading, really. Hallucination is simply when the machine is making up things without, having them checked with sources and stuff like that, making up the answer. Well, within this theory, you are totally allowed to make things up. It's just that, like, so because it's not about them being true or false, but the idea that I had at the end kind of helps you with that, because it tells you, okay, you can make whatever you want, but you are required to be compliant with the directives, and you are required to be able to tell a referential story of why did you say that. It's very similar to humans. Like, you say something, you give me an answer to a question, and I say, why did you come up with that? And if you just said, I don't know, we would treat it as a very weird situation. We expect people to be able to have this story, and DTM is supposed to give this story. So I would say that if the machine was forced to have this kind of inferential stories, the number of hallucinations will just go down.
So you, another words, you take off the responsibility to take the ontological commitments, as we usually say when we build this or that approach in logical semantics or some other approaches. So we take over us, we take ontological commits and different obligations to suppose what sets or what objects we should take as true. Or exist, first of all, ontological commitment to what objects exist. We think they exist, or we suppose they exist. So we avoid this responsibility or obligation. Either the one of the features, the main features of your approach.
You delegate it to other theories, as I said. If you want to need truth and reference, you need additional theories for that. And I think that this is actually that's why I think that this second application to explainable AI actually fits even better than I thought initially in the book. Just because these machines are not capable of doing that, are not capable of checking if something exists or something is true. They can only check if something is compliant with another sentence. And for this kind of operation, for this kind of entity that is capable only of that, this theory is perfect.
Thank you. It's interesting.
Okay, thank you. I see that there is a comment in the chat box by Mateusz Gomulów. Mateusz, I don't know, you are here, so can you perhaps ask your question aloud, because that would make things easier.
Yes, sure. So thank you for your talk. I wanted to ask about that very last part when you were talking about applying those rules of that theory to explanatory AI, and it sounds very confusing for me. Like I
Okay.
don't,
I
yeah.
mean, I try to explain it the best way I can. The way I see it is, again, imagine that you have a machine that is basically construing that outputs sets of sentences based on statistical probability. But then it is what you add is a set of additional sentences that the machine has to always check if the sentences it generates is compatible logically with this other with what it generated. Additionally, it is supposed to create an inferential chain of why exactly these things were generated based on its sources that it used. This is a very different process in reality. So that's what I said. That's why I said at the end that while the way the machine really generates it is different than the way it actually evaluates it and explains it. But this is okay, as in basically that we know that these machines are capable of it. You can already. You can actually ask generative AI if these two sentences are compliant or not, or if a sentence logically follows from another, and in most cases you will get a pretty decent answer. So it's not like they are not capable of it. The idea is that you have a set of sentences, you cannot violate them, as in you cannot, whatever you generate cannot be violating these sentences, violating in a sense that it basically forces you to refute them, any of them. And then there is this requirement of this inferential story that you are supposed to create to back your result. That's how I see it. I'm like, is there any specific part of this that is confusing to
Like,
you?
I would want to follow up with that. Like, do you think it's possible to create that set of those sentences for that
Oh
machine?
yeah, I mean, of course it is. I
Okay.
mean,
So it's not
the
like
idea.
in the ideal scenario, it's like something that can be really possible to do.
I mean, I already thought that it is possible to create this set of sentences when I said that this theory could be a theory of natural language. So if I believe that this theory could be a theory of natural language, I believe that you could actually try to, evaluate the community and see what are the sentences that for this community have to always be accepted. It's probably a lot of work, but it can be done. And the moment you have this kind of set of sentences, you just put it in, and this is how I see it. But at the end of the day, especially with explainable AI, you don't even have to like. I'm not sure if you are required to have the whole set at the. Maybe it can be just generated organically. Like basically, you just work with the machine, and then it gives you stupid result, and you're like, oh my god, of course you can't say this because it would like, and then you just put a sentence. You cannot violate this sentence. Okay, from now on, it gives you 5% less crazy results. Then another case comes where you just realize that it just says something that would violate an obvious rule that you believe has to be always accepted. You give it the rule. Maybe it can be just generated, created organically like that. I mean, if I would to do it, I would probably do it this way.
Okay, now I understand it so much better. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There is a comment from Christoph that Christoph would like to ask a question. So Christoph, if you may, please.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, slightly. I mean, I will try to. Okay, the volume is the highest I can get. Go on.
How about now? Okay.
Yeah, now it's great.
Okay, so I think this also kind of relates to the same issue, and I'm especially wondering about what you call the empirical and the kind of motor directives. And I just kind of don't understand how that would look like for an LLM, right? Because it doesn't have any perceptual states. And it's also unclear to me how it can have any relation to our perceptual states, and like very similar issue to kind of motor action. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering how you imagine that would look like for that kind of system.
Yeah, at this point, that's a very good question. I was thinking about it, and I believe that at this point, I think this would be a very limited application where it would be just that's why in my explanation I was only talking about axiomatic and inferential rules or directives, because LLMs just do not have these things, the model states, and but it also is interesting because it shows the difference. Like whatever the machine, like you can use equivalents, like the same way as LLM does it. When, let's say, LLM analyzes an image you send, at the end it just transforms it to text. And it's so at the end of the day, it always is just ever only faces textual reality. And that's why I don't think that at this level, these rules are needed here in this application. But maybe in the future, AI solutions where will have some non-linguistic, be able to get some non-linguistic data into account. That's a different story. That's for sure coming.
I don't know if you would like to add something, Christoph, please do that.
Okay, no, I think that kind of clarifies for me your view on that. Thanks.
If I may just add the one quick follow-up to this question. I think that this issue becomes a bit interesting in the case of motor directives. Not necessarily the empirical ones, which are kind of no-go now for now. But in the case of motor directives, it's much more interesting because you, in a sense, might in the case of LLMs, simply give orders or requests and stuff like that, and of course await verbal, in a sense, reactions or some other kinds of reactions, but you have something like this mechanism behind. So it's very interesting that you might use this notion of motor directive here as a kind of a quite interesting aspect of the whole story. So
yeah, this is very interesting. Maybe it will be really not a motor directive anymore, but as you may recall, because you've
it's going to be promotive, right?
Mhm.
It's not going to be motor, but it's going to be promotive in the sense of promoting action of some sort,
Mhm.
right? So in this
I
sense,
would say that maybe, I mean, original. Maybe this will be just a different type of directive now, then. I still think so, because there is no motor state. What is important about promotive directives are two things. The direction of fit, which is different than in empirical. So you have acceptance of something and then reaction to it, instead of just accepting something as a reaction to a state. So there's a difference in direction of fit. But it's also, there's this motor state, which is a non-linguistic part. Now, in the current Gen AI, we don't have non-linguistic parts. So in this sense, I would say we could have a different type of directive that has, yes, it has a reversed direction of fit, but it doesn't have motor states or any non-linguistic states. So I think it's very interesting, but I would say that maybe it requires another type.
Yeah, but in the case of motor directives, you might consider cases in which you have a speech act, for instance, and their action is verbal, and this will be a regular case of specific type of let's say, promotive connection, right?
Mm-hmm.
For instance, the connection between asking a question and providing an answer. It's a 100% promotive connection in the sense. It's verbal, but it's promotive. So in that sense, it's a subset of that. So, yeah. So that's.
Yeah, I agree. But maybe it just means that even in the original theory, I needed additional type. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments? If not, if I might just add some from me. So I have two short comments, and I'm very sympathetic towards the theory in general, and I find many of its aspects quite fascinating. But there is one worry which kind of I always have regarding this theory, and the worry is it's sometimes raised in connection with inferentialism in general. And it's a bit methodological worry in a sense. So it looks as follows. If we, let's say, compare two semantical programs in general, the one that is offered by referential semantics in general, and the other that is offered by the Directival Theory of Meaning or inferential or any other non-referential semantics, and there is a huge asymmetry in, let's say, how those accounts conceived as, let's say, research programs look like actually. Because in the case of referential semantics, we have a very extensive list of theories that are very productive, that describe in a very detailed way parts of natural languages. So entire formal semantics is a framework that is done within that kind of approach. So you know, if you, let's say, take Montague and you read papers like English as a formal language, is a beautiful example of a very particular application of the ideas to a fragment of one natural language. And if you take this tradition, let's say, inferentialist or non-referential tradition, and Directival Theory of Meaning is an example, all theorists, which all of them have a beautiful and brilliant theories, but when you ask them about the applications, they always tell you, we in the future we would have to do something like those other guys do, but nobody ever did that till today, even tried to do that. So we are just moving in the realm of toy examples, and we are not kind of moving forward in that respect. So this is one question I want to ask you about. Isn't that a worry? Because for many people, it's a kind of a strong argument against going in that direction, even, right?
Well, it would be cool if someone did the stuff that you mentioned. But a very honest answer is that I think there is a reason why people stop at a certain level. And this reason is that philosophers are often interested in answers to a certain question or a set of questions. The moment they get this answer, they kind of feel satisfied, and then they're too lazy to do more. Just because in this case, if you get the moment you realize that this theory actually explains to you how do you understand what the meaning is and what translation is, what synonymity is, you kind of feel satisfied. And then you realize that, and I would now I would have to, and this is an additional thing, is that unlike these theories, such as, Montague's semantics, you would have to employ methods that are outside of your discipline sometimes. Depends on the theory, but in my, for example, that you all of a sudden have to be just as almost like linguists collect this, observe the reactions of the community, try to find, like, this is just starts to be like too much work, because you already kind of answered the questions that were the most philosophical ones. And the rest is application, which is cool. Application is great. But at the end of the day, at least into my mind, most philosophers are just happy with the moment they answered the philosophical side.
but still, in the case of Montague semantics and intentional semantics, for instance,
Yeah.
you also have the definitions of, let's say, synonym meaning and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And people don't stop there.
I mean, I have no idea why they do that. Like this is like, my point is that
Yeah, but
I
that's a
wouldn't.
fact because the entire tradition in, let's say, linguistics is inspired by this. And
Again, the point is, as I said, this is the difference is that they can use the methods that belong to philosophy, at least in a wide sense of philosophy where logic is part of it.
so perhaps it's high time for somebody to do the job and write a paper, English as a directival language, and just do something like Montague did, and that would be a breakthrough, I would say, perhaps. Yeah. So and one short final question for me would be, I kind of started to be a bit interested in the following issue. When you have a theory of language, a abstract one, like the NDTM in general, so you kind of might be interested, especially philosophers might be interested, not necessarily linguists here, about the notion not just of a language, but let's say of a possible language. And if you wonder, what does it mean for something to be a possible language in general, then it would be interesting to see an answer that can be given in terms of NDTM. And I think there is a answer that might be given by NDTM to this question, which I think I heard on some occasions, which is very disappointing in a sense, because the answer would be anything. Actually can be a language in the sense of NDTM, because you can construct the directives really freely, right? They can be anything you want actually at the end of the day. And so isn't that a worry in a sense?
Yeah, maybe it's just the other side of the coin that normally is quite quite nice, a coin that we can believe we can purchase more with. In that, when I say that NDTM feels like a nice, like an interesting structure that you can use to describe different things, such as when I said that maybe these other filters in language that people use to actually produce utterances, maybe they also could be explained using NDTM-like things, right? So I think that this is nice, but I guess the other side of the same coin is that, well, then it seems that the structure that you use to explain language is actually so general that it actually maybe fits more than that and doesn't differentiate language from other sets of practices, human practices. And on the first, like, I didn't think of that. At the end of the day, I mean, if this is the answer, I agree with you that it is not great, but I can live with that. But then but I still, since I did not think about it, maybe there is something that could be used here to differentiate between language and other things. Well, for starters, I think one thing that makes a difference is the kind of reaction of the community to the violation of the rules. That there is something very special about violation linguistic rules as opposed to other types of rules. So, and I explored this idea in the book by showing that, by asking the following question, which is similar to what you're asking. Can NDTM, if we imagine a community that has some religious rules and some religious dogmas, can we differentiate between how people who violate religious dogmas are treated and how people who violate linguistic rules are treated? And at the end, I think there is a difference, because the moment when, let's say, you violate a religious dogma and you are, I don't know, basically I don't know, thrown out from the community, is because at the end of the day, people assume that you believe what you just said. That's why you actually are prosecuted, let's say. But the special thing about the violation of linguistic rules is that people don't believe that you believe what you just said. You just don't understand the language all of a sudden. So maybe there is something that can differentiate it and say, this is a language, this is special, this is language. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. For just that one thing, I think there is a nice connection with this problem that made Ajdukiewicz to refute the theory, to drop the theory at the end of the day. Because when you have this problem with the theory that predicts that you can have two synonyms that differ in reference, right? Then one possible reaction, not the only one, but one possible reaction to this problem is to say, well, but perhaps this shows the constraints that we should impose on the theory. So something that is considered as a counterexample to theory by some is only showing that we were too liberal and that we have to kind of restrict the theory. And I remember that there was a time when I think it's perhaps in your book as well. I don't remember this, but perhaps the suggestion according to which this counterexample is not a real threat is because you kind of postulate things that are different by simply being different without any substantial differences. And that's why this is not a real counterexample. I think this way of going is kind of saying that you cannot really do anything in terms of producing sets of directives. The set of possible directives must be restricted by, let's say, prohibiting such a situations in a sense, right?
That's for sure one way of doing this. It's just that this one feels to me less attractive, just because it feels almost like we were trying to create a patch on a theory. It's like, right, we are patching this theory because we know that there is a problem, and we are creating a patch that fits exactly this problem. Well, we will just add the constraints that block exactly the problems that we just identified, right? So whereas the answer that I have given feels more, at least philosophically, more intriguing to me, because maybe there is something about the linguistic rules that is special, that makes them identifiable amongst other rules, societal rules, just by nature of what they are. And that's more intriguing to me, at least.
Yeah, I see. Okay, so I think we passed the planned time of the lecture already, and that's partially my fault. So sorry for this.
No, it's good.
But I think that we should close the meeting today. So while I'd like to thank you, Paweł, for the talk and the presentation, and I would like to thank all the participants for questions. And I would like to remind you that the lecture and the discussion shall be available on our channel soon, I hope. So if you are interested in going back to some aspects of the talk, then you might do it at any time. So this is all from me, and I think the last word should belong to the speaker and to Susanna. So thank you.
Thank you very much again for the questions, for the opportunity to present these ideas. Looking forward to see some of you, or maybe all of you, in person in the future.
I'd like to thank all of you for attending the lecture, and I would like to invite you to the next lecture that will be in a month, basically in 20th. 12th of February, and will be given by Peter Simons. And the topic of the lecture is the concept of truth in the Warsaw School. So we'll stay in Poland, but we will move to another topic. So I think that's all. I didn't forget something important, so I could